Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today. It's an original tag created by yours truly. Just recently, I did a character adaptation tag that was created by Seeking Stories. I was tagged, and it was a very brief tag, just 3 questions really, talking about character adaptations from book to screen, either small screen or miniseries or movies, that you liked, that you didn't like, or that you thought were noteworthy improvements. And then you were done. Then the tag was done. And I did the tag. I had a great deal of fun. But I noticed and commented at the time that there were a lot more adaptation style questions that could be asked. And these questions we go into in great more detail. I think it's absolutely fascinating. I have mentioned on this channel many times that I'm a huge fan of literary adaptations. I have the somewhat heretical opinion that I think the literary adaptation is almost always better than the original material, the written material, whatever it is. And certainly, even if it's not better, it's often, mostly, always equally compelling. So I thought I would make a sequel. Since we're dealing with movies, I thought I'd make a sequel. This is the character adaptation tag 2, The Wrath of the Tag. And this is I will leave a link to Seeking Stories' original tag, and this is an elaboration on their tag. And the first prompt is, in their tag, you had to give a couple of your favorite character adaptations from book to screen. And a lot of people who did that tag elaborated on it to just product adaptations, not necessarily just a character, but a movie, a whole book to movie. And I want to do the same thing here. Prompt number 1 is to give your runners up. Give your runners up. You've given those of you who've done the original character adaptation tag have done your favorites. What about your runners up? Other great adaptations that you want to mention. And I have a bunch that I want to go through here. This is going to be much longer, and each one could promote an hour of conversation. But in my runners up, I would list Ben-Hur. Lew Wallace's original book is a trip, but the movie is spectacular. Absolutely. The original movie, not the original movie, but the big Hollywood MGM Lollapalooza, not the recent Action Fest, but the big thing. And then Mary Poppins, a classic that the gays certainly wouldn't let me live without mentioning. I have to mention Mary Poppins, or the gays will be upset. And it's also a thing that tends to be forgotten because it's so much a part of our cultural heritage now that it's almost become background music. The thing that's forgotten is what a terrific movie it is, and I think immensely more enjoyable than any of the books. That's probably heretical. And then Jaws, Peter Benchley's Jaws, Steven Spielberg's movie, is a very effective adaptation. That nevertheless is an adaptation. It's not a strict one-to-one translation. It changes things. It changes Quint. It changes Hooper. It changes what's going on in Brody's life. It changes even the shark to some way or other. And some of the moments work better, and some of them work less well, I think. Some of them are very bookish. There are very bookish moments all throughout Jaws, the book, that Spielberg very wisely chooses not to try to translate because he realizes that they're bookish. There's a moment at the very beginning of the book, the famous opening scene in the movie, a naked woman swimming at night just off the shore is attacked by the shark, and it tears her all around, and then it pulls her under. We all remember that scene from the beginning of Jaws. But in the beginning of the book, before the shark attacks her, it rockets beneath her. It has already sensed her in the water, and it rockets past her, 10 feet below her. And the wave of that pressure bobs her up in the water and down. You could not possibly film that. It's a pure bookish moment, and it works perfectly. Same thing with the first sighting of the shark. It's a classic moment in the movie. You're going to need a bigger boat, where Brody is shoveling chum into the water, and the shark suddenly rears up. In the book, the shark first makes its appearance in a very different way, a much more subtle and low-key way that Hitchcock could have made it an effective moment, but maybe not Spielberg. So it's a very good, very thought-provoking adaptation. Then what else do we have here? Dr. Zhivago, of course, Boris Pasternak's novel. I think the movie version is infinitely preferable to the novel, although the novel has grown on me. Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, with an absolutely all-star cast. I'm talking about the older version. Again, I'm not talking about the sacrilege of Kenneth Branagh and handlebar mustaches. I don't even understand that decision on his part. much less understand the movie, and the movie was infinitely weaker than the older one. I'm talking about the one where Albert Finney plays Hercule Poirot exercising his little gray cells, and that movie is terrific, absolutely terrific, and effectively funny. There's humor to break the tension all through it. What else did I jot down here? Kenneth Branagh's Henry V. I vilify him for his Hercule Poirot, but his Henry V is brilliant, better even than Olivier's, in my opinion. Then what else have we got here? Let's see here. Manhunter. The director Michael Mann's 1986 adaptation of Red Dragon by Thomas Harris is tremendously effective, far more so than the actual movie with Ed Norton called Red Dragon. Wonderful, creepy, atmospheric adaptation of that show. And unlike the Edward Norton version with Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, Manhunter was done before Hannibal Lecter became this weird force of nature character, so he's just a bit part. The emphasis in Manhunter is exactly where it belongs, instead of freighting the whole movie around a character who never leaves his jail cell. So those are some of my runners-up. I could give you a lot more, but we'll stop there. We'll go on to prompt number 2. Prompt number 2 is a very good character adaptation. So we're back to individual characters. A very good character adaptation in a literary adaptation that is otherwise poor. So somebody adapting a book and doing a poor job of it, but with a standout performance. And I have one in mind. It's Russell Crowe as the gangster Pearlie Soames. In Akiva Goldsman's adaptation of Mark Helprin's novel Winter's Tale. Winter's Tale is great. It's a novel that you should waste no time in reading. It is great. But the adaptation, Akiva Goldsman's adaptation, was lifeless. And maybe that's inevitable. Maybe Winter's Tale is close to being unfilmable. I would like to think not. Maybe it just takes a different hand or a different conception. But Russell Crowe as Pearlie Soames was terrific in the movie, just terrific. Scenery chewing, but also sensitive at times too. You never get a bad performance out of Russell Crowe, but you sometimes do expect that even a really talented actor will be brought down by an otherwise weak movie, and it didn't happen in this performance. So I highly recommend it. I don't know that I recommend the movie. I guess if you have a dull evening, you could do that, but you could spend that time reading the book as well. Then prompt number 3 is name some of your holy grails for adaptation to a screen, either a miniseries or a small screen movie or a big screen movie. What are some things you'd like to see adapted? And I have a list here. The first one is Lord Dunsany's novel, The King of Elfland's Daughter. High fantasy. And I would not want Peter Jackson anywhere near it. I want it to be one movie, not 3 or 6 or 9. I just want it to be one movie. But it's a very good story. Very moving. And could be done really well, I think. Another one is Mary McCarthy's book, Memories of a Catholic Girlhood, of a Catholic Childhood. Her memoir about growing up. At first might seem like an unlikely choice. You would need a young female actress. You'd need someone Dakota Fanning style level of talent at that age to pull it off, but I think it would work really well if you stuck close to the book and brought some of the characters, fleshed them out. I think it would work really well. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think it would work really well. Then the next Holy Grail for me is a short story by George R.R. Martin, Sand Kings, which I've mentioned on this channel a few times before. It would be a horror novel, a horror movie, and it could be really, really effective. The story is incredibly effective, and you wouldn't have to do much with it if you didn't succumb to the Hollywood bloat machine. If it wasn't 3 hours long, if you just went for a 1 hour and 90-minute movie or whatever, you could easily do it and concentrate on how creepy it is. I think it would work. I'm not really sure. Then another one on my list is something that I just reread in English, and that is The Idiot by Dostoevsky, which would make, I think, a really absorbing and moving movie. And it's been made into a movie many times, but as far as I know, it's never been made into a movie in English, which is kind of strange. I could say the same thing for Crime and Punishment, now that I think about it. When's the last time there was a mega Hollywood version of Crime and Punishment with an all-star cast and a really good writer? Either way, I think either one of them would work. The Idiot just happens to be on my mind. Then another one would be another short story. This is The Aspirin Papers by Henry James. Very tense. Could be a Merchant Ivory type thing of great depth and it's a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting story, which isn't always true for Henry James. Then to go more contemporary, I'm sure that it's in the works. I'm sure it's been sold. Who knows if it'll ever be made? But John Boyne's The Heart's Invisible Furies, I think, would make a terrific movie. And also, if we talk nonfiction, Hermione Lee's biography of Edith Wharton, I think, would make a terrific movie. I think if you got the right actress and the right supporting people, certainly Edith Wharton's life would make a great movie. And also, the next one we can do is another short story. I think, again, that it would be, that it was fleshed out right, it would work really well. And that is Cordwainer Smith's classic 1950, I think, story, Scanners Live in Vain, about a man who sacrificed his humanity for cutting-edge technology that was once necessary and suddenly isn't anymore, and he can't get his humanity back. And Scanners Live in Vain is at the very beginning of what is a gigantic shared continuity that Cordwainer Smith worked out about the instrumentality of mankind. So I guess if you wanted to expand it a little, you could work in elements of the instrumentality of mankind and even Cordwainer Smith's novel in Australia. It's just I was keeping my ambitions low to make them doable. Scanners Live in Vain, I think, is doable. And the last one on my list, something I've wanted for a long time. I can picture exactly how it would be done, but I don't think it'll ever be done. It's just too hard for most of the crop of current Hollywood movie directors. And that is Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. As a pilgrimage, with characters talking their stories, and of course, in the each character would start their story, then we would shift to seeing that story, and the characters in the pilgrimage would be the characters in that story. And maybe the teller of the tale would be the main character, but maybe not. And a smart director and a good cast, a great cast, could work wonders with that as a method of doing the Canterbury Tales, that the people on the pilgrimage are in the stories. I think it would work. I think it could be made really well. But anyway, that's my Holy Grail list. Again, I could go on. But prompt number 4 is, what would be your dream casting matchup of actor and literary role? Any of them, any role, any actor. I jotted down a few, and of course I had Chaucer on the mind. Melissa McCarthy would be great as the wife of Bath. I would sign her up in a minute. Also, a young actor named Tyrell Jackson Williams. I found him very impressive. And I think he would be great in the lead role of a movie adaptation of The Confessions of St. Augustine, if he could deal with the death threats from people, literary purists or literary frauds, or just easily offended people all over the world, suddenly coming face to face with the fact that St. Augustine may have been black. They might not like hearing that. They might not like thinking that at all. But this guy could do an effective job. And I think The Confessions of St. Augustine could be made into an effective movie, provided it was an idea movie and not an action movie. Then Oscar Isaac, who is Poe Dameron in the Star Wars universe. Who knows if he'll get another chance to play Poe Dameron? I don't know if those characters are coming back. I was a little blurry on that at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. I was a little blurry on whether or not we're ever going to see these characters again. Seems kind of strange if we wouldn't, but one way or another, he might have time on his hands. I thought about him for Leonardo da Vinci, a big, luxurious biopic of Leonardo da Vinci, which, as far as I know, has never happened. And certainly you would want a character like Oscar Isaac, who is younger than the long-bearded Leonardo that we tend to think about, and has a very magnetic personality on camera. He's not really allowed to show that in a Star Wars movie, but he's riveting when he wants to be. And that is the universal account of Leonardo, is that he was riveting. So that would be great. I think that would be, I would watch. I'd probably be the only person to watch any of these things. And then the last one's a stretch. But I would love to see it. The actor Miles Teller, not particularly beloved in Hollywood, not particularly beloved by moviegoers, and possibly deservedly so. He seems to be a bit of an a-hole. but I'm thinking about him for Theodore Roosevelt in an adaptation of Edmund Morris's book Theodore Rex. He has intensity, and you can't look away from him on the screen. And he's a like him or hate him type figure, even in his roles. He comes out with that energy, a like him and hate him energy that certainly characterized Roosevelt. I think that would be an interesting. Of course, a lot would depend on who else you cast and on what the take is for Theodore Rex. But I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Then prompt number 5 is a biggie. It is, do you think is there any book or series you know of that you consider to be unfilmable? And once upon a time, before the advent of green screen and CGI and whatnot, I would have thought there were a whole bunch of things that were unfilmable on the small screen or the big screen. On the small screen, for instance, we saw Gormenghast with Christopher Lee and Judi Dench, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, and before I saw that production, I would have said that Gormenghast was unfilmable. Pretty much incomprehensible, even if you don't try to film it, even if you're just reading it. And yet, I loved the Gormenghast production with those people in it. I loved the visuals of it, loved everything about it. I thought that was a dose of reality for me that book was not unfilmable. And for a long time, despite Rankin and Bass, I would have said Lord of the Rings was unfilmable. In anything like its majesty, in anything like the way that it can take your breath away and totally transport you. And Peter Jackson did that. I might quibble with some of his choices, but he did that. So I learned my lesson about things that are unfilmable, and yet the one that I've picked, I think, is unfilmable, and that is the Divine Comedy. Dante's Divine Comedy. I have it on my mind because I'm deep in this book, this bewildering book, deep in it. But you could, I think, probably film a kind of Inferno, but I think the further along you go, the less filmable it gets. I don't think you could film Paradiso at all. Not unless you did it totally allegorically in some other way, a kid in a candy shop or happening in a park or something like that. I don't think it would be. I can't imagine it. Even in an animated film, I can't imagine it. Then prompt number 6 is, what was the first movie adaptation of a book that you remember seeing? And in my own case, I'm pretty sure it was probably an adaptation of the Swiss Family Robinson. But in terms of the one that I remember, that I intensely remember seeing, I remember what it was, I was invested in what it was doing as an adaptation, that would be 1966, John Huston's adaptation of the Bible, that I loved. Just loved. Still do. Just love it. Not all of it. Some of it is weird. Some of it is strange. Some of it is just Huston being weird about what he chooses to film and what he chooses not to film. And some of the acting that he gets out of some of his characters is really strange. Really, really strange. Some of it's really effective. And that is the first one. I would count that as the launch. I barely, if I technically saw Swiss Family Robinson first, it certainly doesn't count for me as a beginning point. And then number 7, the last question in the wrath of the tag is, are you a tough sell when it comes to adaptations from book to any kind of screen? Are you a tough sell? Do you generally resist them? Or are you open to them? And since I'm not willing to trust you in your own psychoanalysis of yourself, I've come up with a method that proves one way or another whether you're a tough sell. And that is for you to look back at the last 5 things, the last 5 examples of a literary work adapted to film that you saw, and whether or not you like them. And you can tell from your reaction. If all 5 are negative, then you are a tough sell. If all 5 are positive, then all you need is popcorn. You're a cheap date. And I went through my own listings and saw what my last 5 were. So we're going to see whether or not I'm a tough sell. The first one is The Expanse on Amazon Prime, which I admit I'm not done with, but it's fantastic as an adaptation of the science fiction novels. I've now read the first 3 novels that The Expanse is adapting, and I was totally won over, totally on board. The next one is, I don't think it's out yet. It's directed by Julius Arconi Roach, and it is Call of the Wild, starring Harrison Ford. I have an electronic screener for it, and watched it, and I found the adaptation just as boring as I find Jack London. Just as boring as I find Call of the Wild itself. It's one long example of a human trying to imagine what canines think, and that never works well. So, and the adaptation I saw with Harrison Ford, I don't even know what to make of it. I found it pretty inert. So we're one on one side and one on the other so far. Then the next thing on my list was 5 Feet Apart, which starred Haley Lou Richardson and Cole Sprouse, and was directed by Rachel Lippincott from the YA novel about 2 young protagonists who are immunocompromised and have to stay. They can't touch each other. They can't come any closer than 5 feet. And I really thought it was good. Really, really good. Cole Sprouse, I think, commanded the whole movie, and it kind of shows if he weren't, contractually tied to Riverdale, if he were free to be out and about in the wild in Hollywood, I don't know what he couldn't do. Everybody in the movie was really good, but he was a standout. So I liked it. I liked it a lot more than I liked the book. That's for sure. The next one, of course, is Greta Gerwig's Little Women, which did not do well at the movie theaters. That was a surprise to me. I was predicting that it would be a big hit, but it flopped. And I really liked it. I thought it was one of the best adaptations of Little Women that I've ever seen. Lots of liberties taken with both the material and the tone, especially the tone. But I thought they worked. I didn't think they were modern pandering at all. And the next one, the last one on my list of these 5 of my most recent ones, is another electronic screener of Dolittle, of Stephen Gaggen's adaptation of the Dolittle stories, the Dr. Dolittle stories, starring Robert Downey Jr. And one of the items that would have been on my runner-up list was Rex Harrison as Dr. Dolittle a long, long time ago, a musical version of Dr. Dolittle. I absolutely loved that movie. Got the books, got the tie-ins, got the poster, got the album. Absolutely loved that movie. So maybe this was never going to work. Maybe this was totally unfair from the beginning. But I thought that Dolittle was a little bit on the limp side. It never involved me. It never excited me. I never wanted to like Robert Downey Jr.'s Dr. Dolittle. The animal characters didn't have any kind of, I mean, they're not believable anyway, but they didn't have any kind of believability even as cartoons. They were just one-note jokes. So what is our tally? I was not that happy with Dolittle. I loved Little Women. I loved 5 Feet Apart. I was not that happy with Call of the Wild, and I loved The Expanse. So that's 3 out of 5. So I am fairly accessible to adaptations, and I'm curious to know what your tally will be of your last 5. But the only thing left is to tag people, and the problem here is that I don't know who to tag, because an elaboration on this tag will require that you be into cinema, that you be a movie buff in addition to a book buff. And most of us on BookTube are book buffs and maybe don't watch that much cinema. So the people I want to do this tag are the people who have a lot of answers to these questions. If you do, fire them off. I want to hear them. I'm fascinated by the whole subject. So I'm going to wrap this up. There's just an original tag you to consider or not, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.